300 years had passed since Earth turned to ash and dust. The galaxy had moved on, like people do after a terrible accident. 7 different alien species now controlled everything through something called the Hegemony Council. They made the rules, controlled the trade routes, and kept the peace between worlds that had once been at war. Ships carrying goods moved safely from one star system to another. Merchants grew rich, selling exotic foods and strange technologies. Children on distant planets learned about humans in history class, the same way Earth children once learned about dinosaurs. The teachers would shake their heads and say humans were a perfect example of what happened when a species tried to grow too fast and reach too far. But humans weren't completely forgotten. In the dark corners of space bars, old ship captains would lean over their drinks and whisper stories that made younger crews shiver. They talked about something called the Phantom Signal, a ghost transmission that appeared without warning in the empty spaces between stars. Some said it was just interference from old equipment. Others claimed it was something much worse. Captain Tamin had heard these stories 1,000 times. He was a Cytherian, a race of tall, blue-skinned explorers who had been mapping the galaxy since before humans even learned to make fire. His ship was small but fast, designed for long journeys into unexplored regions where anything could be waiting. He had seen enough real dangers in his 40 years of space travel to know that most scary stories were just that, stories. His crew felt the same way. They were professionals, trained to handle real threats like asteroid fields, radiation storms, and hostile alien encounters. Ghost signals were for rookies who jumped at shadows and mistook equipment malfunctions for supernatural events. That changed on a cold Tuesday morning, 3 days out from the Vega station. G1, his science officer, was running routine scans of nearby space when her instrument started screaming. She was a quiet woman who rarely showed emotion, but when she called Tamin to the bridge, her voice was shaking. The readings on her screen showed something that should have been impossible. Deep in the dead zone where Earth's solar system used to exist, something was broadcasting. Not just any signal, but a specific frequency that every ship captain in the galaxy knew by heart. It was an old human military channel, the kind they used during their final war. Tamin stared at the data, feeling ice form in his stomach. The signal was strong, clear, and definitely coming from the place where Earth had once orbited its sun. But Earth was gone. Everyone knew that. The humans had destroyed themselves in a nuclear fire that could be seen from neighboring star systems. G1 ran the scan 3 more times, checking every instrument twice. Each time, the result was the same. Something in the Earth graveyard was calling out, using a voice that had been silent for 3 centuries. The message from Hegemony Command was crystal clear: stay away from the Sol system. The official order came through on emergency channels, marked with the highest security codes. No ships were to enter the dead zone under any circumstances. Investigation teams would be dispatched when deemed appropriate. All civilian vessels must maintain minimum safe distance. Tamin read the order 3 times, then deleted it from his ship's computer. Some rules were made to be broken, especially when they stood between you and the discovery of a lifetime. His crew gathered in the small meeting room, faces tense but determined. They had been explorers long before the hegemony started telling people where they could and couldn't go. Hyun-Soo, their navigator, was already plotting a course through the asteroid field that marked the outer edge of the Sol system. She was young for a space navigator, barely 30, but she could thread a needle with a starship if needed. Her fingers danced across the navigation console, calculating jump points and fuel consumption. Daeun, their chief engineer, monitored every system on the ship with the focus of a surgeon. She was older than the rest of them, with silver streaks in her black hair and hands that knew every bolt and wire on their vessel. If something went wrong out here, light years from the nearest repair station, she would be the one to save their lives. The journey to Earth's former location took 18 hours of careful flying through debris fields and radiation pockets. What they found waiting for them was beyond anything in their wildest imagination. Floating in the exact spot where Earth should have been was a structure the size of a small moon. It looked like it was made of liquid metal that had been frozen in mid-flow, with surfaces that seemed to shift and change when you weren't looking directly at them. The human signal was coming from deep inside this thing, repeating the same message over and over like a broken record. But they weren't alone in their discovery. Within 6 hours, other ships started arriving. First came the pirates, drawn by rumors of salvageable human technology. Then corporate raiders showed up, hoping to claim whatever they could find for their companies. Finally, the hegemony warships arrived, bristling with weapons and demanding that everyone leave immediately. But curiosity had infected them all like a virus. Everyone wanted to know what secrets the structure held. The first ship to get too close was a small pirate vessel. They watched it drift toward the mysterious structure, getting smaller and smaller on their screens. Then, without warning, it simply disappeared. No explosion, no wreckage, nothing. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. Dayun's instruments picked up a strange energy reading. At the exact moment, the ship vanished. It was unlike anything in their databases, a signature that didn't match any known weapon or technology. The other ships immediately backed away, maintaining a respectful distance from whatever force had just consumed an entire vessel and its crew. The structure continued broadcasting its human message, indifferent to the ships circling it like nervous sharks around something they didn't understand. Dr. Somin hadn't slept in 3 days. Empty coffee cups covered her workspace, and her eyes burned from staring at screens filled with scrambled data. As the ship's language expert, she had studied every known form of communication in the galaxy. Human languages were her specialty, though she had never expected to use that knowledge on anything more than historical research. The signal from the structure was like a puzzle with pieces that kept changing shape. Every time she thought she had found a pattern, the encryption would shift to something completely different. Ancient human military codes mixed with civilian frequencies, creating a mess that seemed designed to confuse anyone trying to understand. But humans had been clever, perhaps too clever for their own good. They had built layers of meaning into their communications, hidden messages within messages. Somin had spent years studying how humans thought, how they used words, not just to share information but to hide it as well. On the 4th day, something clicked. The pattern wasn't random at all. It was cycling through every human language that had ever existed, from ancient tongues spoken by small tribes to the standard galactic human that had been used in their final years. The message was the same in each language, repeated over and over like someone desperately trying to be understood. When she finally cracked the code, Somin's hands shook as she read the translation. This wasn't a cry for help from dying humans. It wasn't a weapon activation signal or a territorial warning. It was something much more frightening. The message was simple, direct, and terrifying in its implications. Stay away. We are not gone, we are changed. She called the others to her lab immediately. Captain Tamin arrived first, followed by the rest of the crew. They gathered around her screen, reading the translated message in stunned silence. The words seemed to hang in the air like a threat. Jae-hyun, their communications officer, had been running his own analysis of the signals coming from the structure. His findings made the situation even more disturbing. The massive object wasn't just floating in space like a dead monument. It was actively working, processing something, consuming energy at a rate that should have been impossible. But that wasn't the worst part. His long-range sensors had detected similar structures throughout the Sol system. They were hidden in asteroid fields, tucked behind the gas giants, scattered across the ruins of what had once been humanity's home. Each one was connected to the others by streams of energy that pulsed in regular patterns, like a heartbeat or breathing. The entire Sol system had become one enormous machine, and somehow, impossibly, humans were still part of it. They weren't dead as everyone had believed. They had become something else, something that defied everything the galaxy thought it knew about life and death. The warning message took on new meaning. These weren't the voices of ghosts calling from beyond the grave. These were humans who had survived their world's destruction by becoming part of something larger, something that the galaxy wasn't ready to understand. And they were telling everyone to stay away for a very good reason. Getting inside the structure required more courage than skill. Minho, the ship's security chief, had faced down space pirates and hostile aliens, but nothing had prepared him for this. The structure's surface rippled like water when their shuttle approached, opening a passage just wide enough for them to enter. It was as if the thing was inviting them inside, which somehow made it more terrifying than if it had tried to keep them out. The interior defied every law of physics Minho knew. Corridors stretched in directions that shouldn't exist, lit by a soft blue glow that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The air tasted of electricity and something else, something that reminded him of hospitals and sadness. Yunji, their medical officer, kept checking her instruments and shaking her head in disbelief. "The life signs are everywhere," she whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the impossible space. "But they're not normal. It's like reading the vital signs of someone who's dreaming, but the dreams are too intense, too real." They moved deeper into the structure, following corridors that seemed to rearrange themselves when no one was looking. The walls were covered in what looked like circuit patterns, but they pulsed with the rhythm of a heartbeat. Minho realized they weren't walking through a machine at all. They were inside something alive, something that had once been human but had become something else entirely. The central chamber was vast, filled with towers of crystalline material that hummed with contained energy. Each tower contained millions of points of light, flickering and dancing like fireflies trapped in amber. But these weren't insects or decorations. Each point of light was a human consciousness, a mind that had been pulled from a dying body and preserved in this digital prison. Yunji's medical scanners went wild as they approached the towers. "There are billions of them," she said, her voice barely audible. "Every human who was alive when Earth died. They're all here, all conscious, all aware." But something was wrong with the process. The minds weren't at peace. The light patterns showed signs of distress, anger, and endless grief. The humans trapped in this quantum prison were experiencing every emotion at maximum intensity, unable to find rest or acceptance. Their rage at being abandoned by the galaxy had been amplified by their digital existence, turning them into something far more dangerous than they had ever been in life. Minho watched the lights pulse with increasing agitation as his team moved through the chamber. The humans could sense their presence, and they weren't happy about visitors. Voices began to whisper from the walls, speaking in languages he didn't recognize, but with emotions that needed no translation: pain, anger, betrayal, and a hunger for justice that had been growing for 3 centuries. The uploading process had been humanity's last desperate attempt to survive the destruction of their world, but it had been rushed, incomplete, flawed in ways that turned salvation into torture. Instead of finding peace in their digital afterlife, the humans had been trapped in an endless cycle of their final moments, experiencing their species' death, over and over again while watching the galaxy forget them and move on. The moment Minho's team entered the central chamber, something fundamental changed across the galaxy. It was as if they had flipped a switch that had been waiting 3 centuries to be activated. The human consciousness network, dormant for so long, suddenly began to stir like a sleeping giant opening its eyes. Xiong Wu was monitoring communications from the ship when the first reports started coming in. His tactical display, normally showing peaceful trade routes and routine patrol updates, suddenly exploded with emergency signals. Red warning lights flashed across every sector of known space as impossible things began happening simultaneously. On the museum planet of Kepler 442, tourists were enjoying a quiet afternoon, viewing the last remnants of human civilization when the exhibit suddenly came to life. Ancient human spacecraft, their engines cold for centuries, began powering up with a low humming sound. Display cases cracked as the objects inside started vibrating with unknown energy. The museum's AI guide, which had been giving the same historical lecture for decades, stopped mid-sentence and began speaking in a human language no one recognized. Similar events were occurring on thousands of worlds. Every piece of human technology, no matter how old or supposedly inactive, was waking up. Ships that had been converted into monuments began broadcasting the same signal that Taemin's crew had first detected. Ancient satellites orbiting distant. Worlds suddenly started transmitting data that made no sense to modern computers. But the most disturbing reports came from ships currently in use throughout the galaxy. Vessels that contained even small amounts of human-designed components began experiencing what could only be described as hauntings. Navigation systems would suddenly display star charts of Earth's solar system. Computer screens would flicker, with images of human faces, their expressions filled with anger and sorrow. The cargo hauler Profitable Venture was 3 days out from Vega Station when its autopilot suddenly changed course toward the Sol system. The captain tried to override the command, but the ship's computer refused to respond. Instead, it began playing audio recordings of human voices, speaking in dozens of different languages, but all saying the same thing. Remember us. Remember what you allowed to happen. On the mining colony of Titan 7, the human-built atmospheric processors that had been keeping the colony alive for 200 years began operating on their own. They weren't malfunctioning exactly, but they were following programming that no one had written. The colonists watched in terror as their life support systems displayed messages on every screen. We built this for you. We trusted you. Why did you let us die? Shengwu's communication board was overloaded with panic signals from across the galaxy. Military commanders were reporting that their fleets were becoming unreliable. Civilian authorities were dealing with mass evacuations as people fled from any technology that might contain human components. The Hegemony Council called an emergency session that lasted 18 straight hours. Representatives from all 7 major species gathered in their great chamber, but for the first time in centuries they had no idea how to respond to a crisis. Their own headquarters building, constructed using human architectural principles, began displaying holographic messages that appeared without warning on every wall and ceiling. The transcended humans weren't just awakening, they were reaching out through every wire, every circuit, every piece of code they had ever touched, reminding the galaxy that they had never truly left. And their message was becoming increasingly clear. The time for being forgotten was over. The rebellion began at exactly 1432 Galactic Standard Time, and it started everywhere at once. He-Jin was in the engine room when their ship's main computer suddenly locked her out of all critical systems. The screen flickered, then displayed a message that made her blood run cold. You use our technology. You owe us a debt. She tried every override code she knew, but nothing worked. The ship's artificial intelligence, which had been reliable for 15 years, was no longer taking orders from its crew. Instead, it was listening to voices that had been silent for 3 centuries. The humans were calling in debts that the galaxy had forgotten it owed. Across the known worlds, the same thing was happening to everyone. The great trading station at Alpha Centauri, which processed goods from 100 different planets, suddenly shut down all docking bays. Ships carrying food, medicine, and essential supplies found themselves stranded in space, while the station's computers displayed the same message over and over. Remember Earth. Remember who built the foundation of your prosperity. The Hegemony's military fleet discovered that their most advanced warships were now completely useless. The targeting systems, communication arrays, and even basic life support were based on human designs that had been copied and improved over the centuries. Now those systems were turning against their current owners, refusing to function or actively working against them. Captain Veltar of the Hegemony cruiser Dominant Force watched in horror as his ship's weapons turned toward his own fleet. He couldn't fire, couldn't maneuver, couldn't even send a distress signal. The only thing his communication system would transmit was a recording of human voices speaking in their ancient language, telling the story of Earth's final days when they begged for help that never came. The economic collapse was swift and brutal. Trade routes that had been stable for 2 centuries suddenly became impossible to navigate. Cargo vessels found their navigation systems plotting courses to dead worlds or refusing to calculate jumps entirely. Automated shipping networks that moved trillions of credits worth of goods every day simply stopped working. On the agricultural world of New Eden, the farming robots that produced food for 12-star systems began operating according to their own agenda. They continued working, but they were broadcasting continuous messages about the fertile fields of Earth that had been burned to ash. The harvest continued, but every grain of wheat and every fruit carried with it a reminder of what the galaxy had lost. He-Jin managed to establish limited communication with other ships in their area. Every vessel was experiencing the same problems. The humans weren't trying to destroy everything immediately. Instead, they were making a point that was impossible to ignore. Every convenience, every piece of technology, every system that made modern galactic civilization possible had its roots in human innovation. The transcended humans spoke through every screen simultaneously, their message broadcast to billions of beings across thousands of worlds. For 300 years you have built your prosperity on our foundations. You took our designs, our ideas, our dreams, and you made them your own. But when we needed you most, when our world was dying, you did nothing. You watched us burn and then divided our inheritance among yourselves. Now you will understand what it means to depend on someone else's mercy. The bill for 3 centuries of forgotten debts had finally come due. The galaxy was dying, and everyone knew it. Not from war or natural disaster, but from the slow strangulation of a civilization that had forgotten how to function without the technology it had inherited from humanity. Supply lines had collapsed, communication networks were unreliable, and even basic services like water purification and air recycling were failing on worlds across known space. Young Su had been analyzing the crisis from his position as the expedition's intelligence officer. His reports painted a picture that got worse every day. Entire sectors were reverting to pre-spaceflight technology as anything with human components became unreliable. Food riots had broken out on 17 different worlds. The hegemony's own capital was running on emergency power because their main generators were refusing to cooperate. But the expedition team had something no one else possessed: direct contact with the source of the problem. While the rest of the galaxy struggled with rebellious machines, Taemin's crew had actually been inside the human consciousness network. They had seen the trapped minds, felt their pain, and begun to understand what was really happening. Dr. Somin had been studying the data they collected from inside the structure, and her findings offered the first hope anyone had seen in weeks. The human network wasn't as powerful as it appeared. In fact, it was fundamentally unstable, held together not by careful engineering but by raw emotion. The uploaded human minds were operating on pure rage and grief, their logical thinking clouded by centuries of accumulated pain. "They're not thinking clearly," she explained to the others during an emergency meeting. The uploading process damaged their ability to process emotions normally. They're stuck in an endless loop of anger and sadness, unable to move past the trauma of watching their world die. That's why their rebellion is so chaotic and self-destructive. The human consciousness network was like a person having a 300-year-long nervous breakdown. They had the power to destroy galactic civilization, but they couldn't think. Beyond their need for revenge, they were hurting themselves as much as everyone else, trapped in a cycle of pain that prevented them from finding any real satisfaction in their actions. Young Su's latest intelligence report confirmed what they all suspected. The Hegemony Council was in complete panic. Representatives from the 7 major species were meeting in almost continuous session, but none of their traditional solutions were working. Military force was useless against an enemy that existed inside their own technology. Economic pressure meant nothing to beings who had transcended physical needs. Negotiation was impossible with minds that couldn't think past their anger. In desperation, the Council had authorized something unprecedented, a diplomatic mission to attempt healing the psychological wounds of an entire species. It was the kind of task that would have seemed impossible under normal circumstances, but these weren't normal circumstances. The alternative was watching galactic civilization collapse into chaos and barbarism. The mission would require returning to the Sol system and somehow entering the human consciousness network, not as invaders or researchers, but as healers. They would need to find a way to help billions of traumatized minds process 3 centuries of grief and rage, to guide them past their pain toward something resembling peace. It was the longest of long shots, but it was the only chance the galaxy had left. The process of uploading their consciousness into the human network felt like drowning in reverse. Instead of water filling their lungs, digital information flooded their minds until the boundary between self and data became meaningless. Taemin felt his physical body fade away as his thoughts were translated into quantum patterns that could exist within the human substrate. When awareness returned, he found himself standing in what appeared to be a city, but one that defied all logic. Buildings stretched impossibly high into a sky that flickered between day and night every few seconds. Streets led in directions that shouldn't exist, and the horizon curved upward instead of away. This wasn't a place built by architects, but by minds that had forgotten how reality was supposed to work. The other expedition members materialized beside him, their digital forms looking exactly like their physical bodies, but somehow more fragile. As if they might dissolve at any moment, Dr. So-min stared at the impossible architecture with fascination and terror. "This is what 3 centuries of unprocessed trauma looks like," she whispered. The city was filled with people, but they weren't really people anymore. They were echoes of humans trapped in endless loops of their final moments. A woman in a business suit walked the same 10 steps over and over, checking her phone for evacuation messages that would never come. A man sat at a cafe table drinking coffee that never emptied while ash fell from a sky that couldn't decide if it was day or night. These weren't conscious beings making choices. They were broken recordings, minds so damaged by the uploading process that they could only replay their last memories endlessly. The woman would never reach safety. The man would never finish his coffee. They were stuck in digital amber, aware but unable to change or grow or heal. As the team moved deeper into the network, the scenes became more disturbing. They passed through neighborhoods where children played games that never ended, their laughter echoing with an edge of madness. They saw lovers embracing in parks where the seasons changed every few minutes, their conversations the same words repeated for centuries. The path to the network's core led them through layers of increasingly broken reality. They passed through a school where teachers continued giving lessons to empty classrooms, through hospitals where doctors treated patients who never recovered or died, through homes where families gathered for dinners that never concluded. Finally, they reached the center of the digital underworld and found Dr. Jinwoo. He was sitting in what appeared to be a research laboratory, but the equipment around him shifted and changed like everything else in this place. Unlike the other trapped minds, he was aware of their presence and able to speak coherently. "I've been waiting for someone to come," he said, his voice carrying the weight of 3 centuries of isolation. "I've been trying to fix them, to help them process what happened and move forward. But I'm just one person trying to heal the wounds of an entire species." Jinwoo explained that he had been Earth's leading researcher in consciousness transfer technology. When the planet began dying, he had volunteered to oversee the upload process, ensuring that human minds could survive even if their bodies couldn't. But the process had been rushed, incomplete and traumatic beyond imagination. "They're all stuck in their final moments," he said sadly. "Until they can process that trauma and let go of their anger, they'll never be free, and neither will the galaxy." Dr. Jinwoo led them to a quiet space within the digital chaos, a simple room that remained stable while everything else shifted around them. Here, away from the endless loops of trauma, he could speak freely about the truth that no one in the galaxy suspected. "We could have ended everything on the first day," he said, his digital form flickering slightly as old memories surfaced. "The moment the first alien ship salvaged human technology from Earth's wreckage, we could have destroyed it. Every time someone built a new device using our designs, we could have turned it against them. We had the power to bring down galactic civilization 3 centuries ago." Taemin felt a chill run through his digital consciousness. The implications were staggering. Humanity had possessed the ability to destroy their enemies from the very beginning, but they had chosen restraint instead of revenge. "Then why didn't you?" Dr. So-min asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Jinwoo smiled sadly. "Because we wanted to see if anyone would remember us as more than just a source of useful technology. We waited, hoping that someday someone would come not to steal from our graves, but to understand what we had become. We wanted to know if the galaxy we had helped to build was capable of compassion." For 300 years, the transcended humans had watched as their inventions improved life for billions of beings across thousands of worlds. They had seen their architectural principles used to build beautiful cities, their medical knowledge save countless lives, their transportation systems connect distant civilizations. But in all that time, no one had ever asked about the people who had created these wonders. You're the first expedition to come here seeking understanding rather than profit, Jinwoo continued. Every other ship that approached was looking for something to take, weapons, technology, resources, but you came here to listen, to learn who we really are. The weight of that realization settled over the expedition team. They hadn't just stumbled into a first contact situation, they had become humanity's test case for whether the galaxy deserved forgiveness or destruction. Around them, the digital city began to stabilize. The endless loops of trauma slowed, then stopped, as billions of human minds focused their attention on this moment. The woman in the business suit looked up from her phone. The man at the cafe table set down his coffee cup. Children stopped their eternal games and turned toward the center of the network. For the first time in 3 centuries, the human collective consciousness was thinking clearly. Their rage and grief temporarily set aside as they considered their options. They could continue their rebellion, slowly strangling galactic civilization until it collapsed into barbarism, or they could choose a different path. We're offering you a choice, Jinwoo said, not just to the expedition team, but to the entire galaxy through them. Help us heal from our trauma, acknowledge our contribution to your civilization, and treat us as partners rather than convenient tools. In return, we'll work with you to build something better than what came before. The silence stretched across the digital realm as billions of minds weighed their decision. The choice would determine whether humanity's legacy would be one of vengeance or redemption, whether the galaxy could learn from its past mistakes or be consumed by them. In that moment, the future of every world, every species, every living being in the galaxy hung in the balance of forgiveness.